Come, all you moonshiners, if you want to hear about the kind of booze that they serve around here. Made way back.
Well, welcome back to Barley and Hops. I'm George. This is the channel that tries its best to unlock all the mysteries of home distilling, home brewing, or whatever it is that your pleasure is. And if it makes you happy, as I always say, do it as much as you possibly can. Now, we're going to run an 8-gallon combination pot reflux still with a 3-inch column. And it's a brew house model. We're going to run it in reflux mode, okay? So I'm going to show you how we're going to do that. You caught me in the middle of assembling this, and I just wanted to show you a few things before we even get started, because I think these are important. These are important aspects of how we get there. So don't forget, subscribe, like, share us with your friends. Let's move on. Now here's what I have. At the very bottom here, you'll see I've got my 8-gallon kettle sitting on 2 blocks of wood. And now the reason I've done that is I want to try to, it's not as much of an insulator as it is a separation. I want to separate my kettle from the floor because heat will dissipate through the floor when I've got all that in contact with the floor. It's sort of like, I've got a large surface area in contact with the floor. It's going to drain heat out of it. I don't want that to happen. Now I don't mind it draining a little bit off the top of these blocks, but it's got a long way to go. So this is not as much insulation as it is standoff, okay? And that just allows me to maintain kettle temperature a whole lot better. Now, but the area that is important is my column. And I want to make sure that I can, see, what I'm doing here is I'm trying to arrest those environmental conditions that tend to have an adverse effect on your run. In a lot of cases, you're unaware of that. But if you even have a small breeze that's blowing across your column, you'll notice that your temperature will start to fluctuate. And especially if you're using a proportional integral derivative controller of some sort, or even a mercury hydrometer that you put in there, or a dial thermometer, you'll notice that your temperature will start to adjust because it is sensitive, and even a brisk breeze will cause your temperature to drop, or when the breeze goes away, your temperature come back up. So what we do is we're going to insulate this column. And I already insulated this one, and here's how I did that. I went down to my local Home Depot, and I bought this. This is a rubberized insulation for pipe. And I got this one is made for a 1-inch pipe. But lo and behold, if you spread it all the way out, it's about 5 inches across. Well, it's all the way around my 3-inch column is 10 inches. So that's all I need was 2 of these. So what I do is I just cut a piece and then cut another piece the same size, and then I marry them together like this. So it's like sort of like a sandwich. You see there's a seam here and there's a seam on this side, and since it's self-sticking, and trust me, it's not as easy to put on as you may think. You have to mess with it a little bit, but you peel these papers off, and then whatever it touches, it sticks to. So be careful. Now, which size do you need for a 2-inch column? I don't know. Whenever I go down and get that, and I'll post it on one of the other videos, but if I don't know, I don't want to say because, of course, it would be inaccurate, incorrect, and I don't do that intentionally. So I've got that, and I've got to do the same thing to the upper portion of the column, which is what we'll be watching for the rest of the run. We won't be watching this any longer. There's no sense in watch that. And you'll notice here that I've got, yep, that's my favorite cooler with my air conditioner sitting on top of it. That's going to chill my water, keep it chilled, so I don't need any ice. I will pump water from here into the column or to the condenser, and the return line goes right back inside. So all I'm doing is recirculating that water, and I'm not wasting water. And oh, by the way, I'm not going through that challenge of trying to keep putting ice in there because there's a challenge with that as well. So we've overcome that. I will be using a 240 volt, 3500 watt element. And with that 3500 watt element, I'm going to use I've got a rudimentary, it's right here somewhere, a rudimentary PID controller that really is nothing more than just the controller and the receptacle, and boom, that's all it does. It's not sexy. And I just use that because it just happens to be laying around here. And I'm going to use we now have an app. Oh yeah, how about that? Barley and Hops has an app, thanks to Mark. We put together this app, and this one here, there's 3 as a matter of fact we have. And this one's called Time to Heat Up Liquid. And I've already entered this, and it's real simple. You just enter the number of gallons that you have, and that's here. And of course, there's, well, I'm doing gallons and not liters, so it works with liters as well. And then the temperature in Fahrenheit is 75 degrees in here, and I want to get this to 180 degrees. And down here, I'm going to use one element, one heater element, and it's going to be a 3,500 watt element. And what this tells me is that in the very bottom, see, because you can also put it in cost specifications, and I think I'm paying 15 cents per kilowatt hour. And I do it in U.S. currency. We've got it listed for all the currencies throughout the world. So this is going to cost me 23 cents, and it's going to take me 26 minutes to heat it up. That's what that tells me. So it's going to take, according to our app, it's going to take 26 minutes to go from 75 degrees to 180 degrees. But of course, we will be doing things in between that period of time, because what do we have to do? If you've been watching some of these videos, you already know we're going to have to balance the column. Then we have to start our condenser flow at the appropriate time. And then at the appropriate time, we're going to have to start the flow of water into our reflux chamber. So remember, those are two different things. You know, one of them is your condenser that goes on full blast because you don't have to worry about controlling that. But your reflux chamber, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail. So my next step is to turn on my air conditioner, let that cool down, and then, gosh, just assemble the rest of this still. I'll be right with you. Well, now, before we go any further, what I want to do first is I'm going to add some stuff to my column. Now, you don't have to do this. Totally up to you. What happens if you add something else into your column? Well, if you add packing material, if you do, it provides a lot more surface area for those vapors and or liquid to flow over and therefore separate before they drop down at the bottom of your tank. You see, that's what we're doing is we're just going to give the flow of liquids that actually start to come back down our column, we're just going to give them much more area to travel over, thin out, and so that it's a lot easier for us to separate by the use of heat the most volatile substances, which are our substance, which is ethanol. See, so we want to try to separate that ethanol purely without it hitting back in the tank. And to do that, look, there's many different things you can use. I use a combination of stuff, and I got a whole bag of it right here that I've been using over and over again, and I collect it. These are them real small ration rings, and I'll use these probably in the Mighty Mini. They're really small, but they go a long way. Then I've got these. I've got some large ceramic rationing saddles, and I've got some marbles. Marbles work extremely well too. Now, and you know, even those, you know, if like you go to the dollar store, you know, they got those flat decorative glass marbles. They look like a marble that's been flattened. Those work good too, and they provide you with a whole lot of surface area. Plus, they don't collapse on each other and cause a backup of pressure. See, that's what we want to avoid. We want to make sure that whatever we add into the column doesn't restrict any flow of vapor. So when you add these, now I know how much I'm going to add, which is going to be like 3 handfuls. Let me do that, and then I'll explain what I'm about to talk about. Now this column has a screen on the bottom that prevents these from falling down inside the kettle. If you don't have that, you can add something in there. You can fashion something to prevent these from falling down inside there. Or they even make, matter of fact, they even make a gasket that's got a screen in it that would fit right on top of your column. So, okay, that's plenty. Now, whenever you pack a column, ensure that you're able to, at the very end, once you get it all packed, that you can put your mouth on one end of it and breathe easily. If there's any restriction in you breathing through your column, well then, what's that going to tell you? That will tell you that you're packed a little bit too tight, and now you're going to have a temperature challenge. Also, you're going to have a vapor flow challenge. See, what will happen is your vapors will start to back up, and back pressure will begin to start to form. And then once that pressure overcomes the restriction, it'll blow through. Once it blows through, well then that's going to pop out the top. It'll cause your still to either puke and or the temperature to shoot up. And then what happens? You start that cycle. The temperature starts to drop. Everything drops back down. Nothing's happening. Pressure starts to build back up. Then all of a sudden, poof, it takes off again. So you'll have this never-ending cycle of back pressure buildup, back pressure relief. Back pressure, you follow me? And it's not good for your process or your operation. So make sure you don't pack your column too tightly. Yes. Now, for those of you who are going to ask about copper, I'm going to do it. I have run stills with copper, without copper. I can't tell the difference. I have found no one that can tell me the difference, or I can give them a shot of each one with and without. They can't tell the difference. But there's a belief out there that you got to have copper. So, you know, in order to settle it, I always just put a roll of copper in, just because everybody thinks that you need to have copper. So I'm going to add this in there. As a matter of fact, I've even heard they say, oh, well, George, it removes the sulfites. Well, there are no sulfites. There are sulfites in wine, but sulfites, believe it or not, is an antibacterial. So you need the sulfites. And that would be during the fermentation process and while it's storing. So sulfites are a good thing. They say, oh, no, it's the sulfates. Well, sulfates are salts of acid. You don't have any acids. I'm trying to wonder, again, you see, I have yet to find the definitive evidence. Of course, I can find the arguments on both sides of whether you have to have copper or whether you don't have to have copper. And that's okay. You know what? I have resigned myself that I know what my experience is, that it makes no difference to me whether I use it or whether I don't use it. But to satisfy the majority of the folks who believe you absolutely have to have it, I put it in there. And if you're like me and you don't care either way, having it in there or not having it in there makes no difference. Let's move on. All right. Now we are to affix our upper portion of our column to the lower portion of this column. And that's just a real simple, made it up together. And you can see I've already got this one wrapped in that insulation as well. Now, I've left these unwrapped, and the purpose of that is because this is my reflux chamber. And this reflux portion of this column allows me to pre-condense those vapors that are traveling up the column. And if I pre-condense, not fully, just pre-condense. Because if you fully condense them, that means that they're coming up here and they're dropping right back down. Coming up here, dropping right back down. And if you're using a PID in particular, you'll never get your head temperature to where you want it to be, no matter what you do. Because all you're doing is cooling it when it gets to this point. And that's not what you want to do. You want to pre-condense it, which is cool it just enough to liquefy the unstable vapor that gets here and allow that to drop and then start to re-vaporize in the base of your column and travel back up. So that the most volatile, and we say this all the time, the most volatile substances travel past your reflux chamber and into your condenser. Now, those are still a vapor, and as they come out and you condense them back to a liquid, they are extremely pure. I'll show you that. Well, we have got this thing all put together. Now, trust me, up front, yep, this looks like a hot mess. But believe it or not, it does make a lot of sense. Now, most of what I use here are things that you may have laying around the garage. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to demonstrate that this can be done relatively simple without going out and spending a buttload of money, except for, you know, the still itself. So now we've got it insulated, the column, and I've got the reflux tubes hooked up. Now there's two types of reflux design. Besides the deflagmator, which is a totally different apparatus itself. Very similar, exactly the same, only different. Okay, but we're not going to talk about that. In this particular case, you have either the cross tubes, which these are, or you have the jacketed. Now, in different companies and manufacturers are kind of married to either one or the other. Very few do both. And of course, if someone makes the cross tube like this one, they're going to swear that the cross tube works better than the jacketed. Well, guess what? If the manufacturer designs the jacketed, they're going to swear that the jacketed works better than the cross tube. Let your conscience be your guide. I have both. And again, this is one of those, do you need copper or not? Is one better than the other? If you believe that the jacketed is better, well, by all means, use one that's jacketed. And what I mean by jacketed, it's got the jacket around the outside of the column, and you got the cold water around the outside of the column. Or if you think the cross tubes, which run completely through, are better, use the cross tubes, okay? So that should settle that. Don't ask me. I don't have a preference over one or the other. They both work exactly the same way, in my opinion. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, okay? We haven't even turned this on yet because I wanted to explain the setup. Of course, you got your kettle, your column. This is the condenser. And what I've done is I've moved the air conditioner and cooler closer so I can use it as a table as well. That way I don't have a whole bunch of extra stuff laying out here. And my cold water goes in the bottom of the condenser and it comes out the top of the condenser and goes right back in. So I've got two pumps. I could have done this with one pump and then put a valve or a T-fitting in the middle of the line and tap off of that for my reflux, but I figured, what the heck. I threw an extra pump in there, so I'm going to run that separate. So this one runs full blast, in and out, and goes right back in. So we're just circulating water through this condenser. Okay, that's a Liebig condenser. Now the second one I have is, I've got another pump in there that's running, again, the pump runs full blast, but we're going to control it with this small valve. And this is nothing more than an on-off ball valve. So I can adjust this to run very slowly or full open. And what happens is the water goes in the bottom tube, goes across, comes out the backside, goes around, goes in the next tube, comes out, goes back around, goes in this tube, goes out, goes back around, goes through that last tube, and then from here it just runs right back into the cooler. So I'm circulating that water separately from this one. Now, why do we do that? This is where it begs the question. No, you're not going to get away with it. George has got to use the whiteboard to explain this because it is really important, and I need for you to understand this because this is how a reflux still actually operates. Now, you've got vapors that start to travel up this column, okay? And they're making their way. Your column's going to balance, which means that the column and the kettle, the vapors are going to be the same temperature, okay? That way, if you have an input of more energy, that transfer happens fairly quick, not instantaneous, and it's picked up by your probe. And you see I've got my probe at the very top, and that's where, you see, once your probe at the point of no return, point of no return, PONR, okay? And so that's the point of no return for your vapor. That's where you're taking your temperature. And you want these vapors to pass all the way up this tube, and you want to be able to control them because we know that, just as an example, ethanol somewhere around the neighborhood of 173 Fahrenheit, okay? Somewhere around that neighborhood. And then again, it all depends on, you know, elevation, humidity, atmosphere, all that stuff is going to play a role in what the actual boiling point and vapor temperature is going to be for that. And of course your mix. But somewhere in the neighborhood of 173-ish, all right? Now you still may run great at 184. Don't worry about that. The point is we're trying to describe what happens to these vapors. Now when they come across these, and I've got, this is just a rudimentary drawing of, all these are cross tubes that go across inside that column. And if you've got cold water trickling through there, and then when I say trickle, in here, remember, cold water in, cold water out, full bore, just let it run. In here, we have to meter that. And the reason we have to meter that is because we don't want to fully condense like we do here. We want to pre-condense. So we're going to condense just enough to allow that unstable substance to start to condense and drop. And so it'll get to here and it'll start to drop back out and go back down. And as it drops back down, and of course it hits whatever packing you have in there or no packing, it enters into a warmer area with a higher temperature. And the most volatile substance starts to rise again. See, this is what they call that reflux action. You have two paths or two directions of a path. You got one path, which is a circular, but you got two directions. In first case, you have all your vapors traveling up and then starting to pre-condense. Your most volatile vapors will continue to rise and exit out your port and condense. The ones that don't make it out will start to drop back down. But as they drop back down, again, your most volatile substance that are still connected to all of those molecules in that mixture start to separate again, and then they turn around and start to rise again. When they rise up, as long as this condensing temperature is not too cold, which is below their condensing temperature, they'll pass right through it and go into your actual condenser, and then anything like water will drop back out. And that's what you want to have happen. You want the waters to drop out, but you want the ethanol to continue to flow. That's why you wind up with a more pure product. Now, just keep in mind, I didn't say better product. I didn't say more product. I said a more pure product, which means that your ethanol content is going to be higher than your water content. What does that mean? If it is 100 and let's say it's 100 proof. Well, you know, 100 proof is 50% alcohol. That's 50%. And it's actually ABV, alcohol by volume, in your jar. Which means that of this 100 proof, if you have 8 ounces, 4 ounces is ethanol. And 4 ounces is water, H2O. That's what that means. Now, if the higher proof, we consider that to be a little bit more pure. Let's work our way up. Let's say we're at 160 proof. That means that this is 80% ABV. So what does that mean in this particular case? It's better if we use 10. Let's say we have 10 ounces. Yeah. So if we got 10 ounces, that means 8 ounces of that is ethanol and 2 ounces is water. You get my point? Your purity and strength have gone up. Your volume hasn't changed, okay, but the purity has changed. Now, what are the effects of purity over flavor and quality? Well, it's rather simple. The higher the proof, the more neutral it is. Meaning, it really has no taste. It has vodka is a great example of a neutral spirit. A neutral spirit that has no flavor to it because it's been refluxed and brought out at such a pure level that none of the flavors carried on through. Now, see, that brings us to, now why do we use a pot still? If we have a pot still, which is exactly the same thing, except I just would hook these up. I just take those off, and then the tubes mean nothing. That you can just consider them not even being there. Your vapors go right past them. And as those vapors go past them, since they don't pre-condense, nothing drops. So nothing gets re-vaporized. So what you have now is you'll have everything that used to be in this as a reflux that was dropping back is going to travel right on through, which is where all of the, they call them conagers, or all the characteristics, the flavors of whatever's in your mash, those things that you so desperately wanted to have in the first place are there. And they will carry through into your condenser. See how simple that is? Here's the challenge. One challenge that a lot of folks have is that I want a really, really high proof and I want it to taste good, so I want to, you can't do that. It won't happen. It's physically impossible to get 190 proof and for it to taste like it would if you were running it at 130 proof. It's just not going to happen. remember, you're stripping all of the water out of it. So you're stripping all the conagers, you're stripping all the character and all the flavors and everything, and you're just running off pure ethanol, or more pure ethanol. Okay. Now, we should be making progress. So now comes the time when, and again, I'll have a PID sit back here. We'll fire this thing up here shortly, and remember, I will meter the water through my reflux chamber. And now, here's a great question. How do I know how much water to meter through my reflux chamber? Well, besides experience, we'll check that with a hydrometer, the proof and trail hydrometer. Because what happens if I have too much water flow? Think about it, we just discussed that. Too much water flow through my reflux chamber means that I'm condensing more than I really need to, matter of fact, more than I want to, and two things are going to happen. The proof is going to drop dramatically, boom. And also the production is going to drop. I may have nothing coming out. So that's one thing that'll happen. So when I start to meter the water in, I'll notice that my production will start to increase and my proof will start to rise. Now what happens if I have not enough water going through there? Well, now my production will increase and my proof will also drop. So you'll have two possibilities here. All right, remember, the first possibility is too much water. Drop in proof, drop in production. Okay? That's too much water going through your reflux chamber. Not enough water going through your reflux chamber, you'll have a drop in proof, increase in production. So keep that in mind. And once you get that, and you can kind of visualize there, you can kind of visualize that, everything else kind of makes sense. Now the last point to make here before we shut off and go to the next step is ABV. Everybody wants to have the highest, best, and strongest. That's 180 proof, and by golly, I measured it. I want you to consider this, and it also has to do with ABV. Remember, we talked about in a wash or a mash, whatever it is, the ABV has absolutely, there's a line between the two, has nothing to do with proof. Nothing to do with proof. ABV, there's not a direct connection between alcohol by volume in a mash and proof that you produce. Here's my point. Remember this, 5 gallons. Okay, 10% ABV. Okay, 10% ABV in 5 gallons is exactly the same thing as 5% in 10 gallons. These two together, two 5-gallon buckets, it's 10 gallons. So 10% in 5 gallons is exactly the same thing as 5% in 10 gallons. So far? Oh. ABV, the only thing ABV will affect is volume. If I have 10% in 5 gallons, let me write that better than that. 10% in 5 gallons, 10% of a gallon times 5, that's my expected output. That's what I'm going to get out of this, okay? So what's 10% of 5 gallons is 0.5. That's a half a gallon. That's a half a gallon of pure ethanol. But of course, you know you don't collect pure ethanol, so you collect water as well with that. So my anticipated collection volume is going to be about 3 quarts. Follow this through. I didn't say anything about proof. I didn't say a word about proof. Because proof at that point only has something to do with, has a direct effect on your process. If you and I are both running a still, and you've got a bucket with 10%, and I've got a bucket with 5%, and both of them are 5-gallon buckets. You run yours still, and you're going to run yours still at, it doesn't matter to me, but let's say you run it as a pot still, and you run it at a high temperature, so you run it out really fast. It doesn't matter, whatever the case may be, but you're only collecting at 120 proof. Well, my still, I'm going to run it correctly. If you run it correctly, you never have to filter, and oh, by the way, it comes out more pure. I'll run my still, and I'll do this better. And I got a bucket with 10% in it, okay? And we both run it the same way, except I'm going to run it correctly, or let's say, no, you're going to run it correctly, and I'm going to run it incorrectly, which is not track my data points and not track the temperatures and not do the right thing. You're going to run it, you're going to come out with 100 on an average, okay? After everything's all said and done, you're going to run it with probably 145 to 150 proof. And see, I'm going to run mine, I'm going at it real fast. I'm just not paying attention, I'm not tracking, I have no experience with it, and I think I know better than everybody else. And mine comes out at 110 proof. We both had the same amount of alcohol. We're going to end up with the same amount of ethanol. I'm just going to have a whole lot more water with mine than you are. Yours is going to be better. Mine's going to be weaker. And oh, by the way, it's probably going to have a bunch of tails and things. You see all the problems that start to arise? So my point is that if you run a still, run it correctly. There's no need to run it twice. Why do it twice? Why don't you do it right the first time? I am an advocate of stripping runs, but a stripping run is used to really control volume. If you got a 50-gallon still, it's easy to run a stripping run and bring that down to a manageable volume and then run it correctly, as opposed to trying to run 50 gallons correctly, which could take you 18 hours. You with me? We shall return shortly, and when we get to part 2 of this, we're going to turn this thing on, we're going to run it, and I'm going to show you, and we're going to work our way through step by step how to actually run a reflux still, and we're not even going to bother running pot mode. Happy distilling.